Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon to all of you. Before we begin, if you can all please confirm that you can hear me and see the slides clearly by just typing in yes in the chat window. Also, please feel free to introduce yourself, your name, your position, your company, and which country you're based in using this chat window. Okay, great. I see a lot of replies coming in the chat window. Great. It's really good to have you all from different industries and backgrounds. It's really nice to meet you all. First of all, I would like to thank you all for registering and taking out time on Sunday to learn about the well integrity management system in accordance with ISO 16530 using the VAIL-Plant web software. My name is 𝐻𝐞𝐚𝐫𝐧𝐢𝐧𝐠, and I am the lead software engineer at Velosi. For the next 2 hours, it will be our pleasure to host this webinar for you. As some of you may know that this is our 66th webinar in a series of technical webinars that we are conducting as a practice. We are conducting one webinar every month now, so you can take the latest updates of our webinars, of our upcoming webinars using our LinkedIn, our website, and using the website, you can stay tuned to the latest updates. Also, for the recording of this webinar, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Velosi. And then from there, you can have the look at all the series of webinars that we have conducted till yet. So today, we have quite an experienced panel of speakers for you who will be covering this topic. I'm with my colleagues, Mr. 𝐸𝐬𝐿, who is the Managing Director, Principal Integrity and Safety Consultant, Mr. Anthony James Williams, who is the General Manager, Global Sales, Mr. Wajahat Malik, who is the Lead RCM Engineer, and Mr. Arshad Ali, who is the Manager, Software Department. During this webinar, we encourage you all to keep asking questions to clear any kind of doubts. We would like your engagement on this topic. This will not only help you, but also many others who may have the same kind of queries during this webinar. You can type in your queries in the Q&A window, and we'll either reply you live, or we'll answer your query using the chat window or the Q&A window itself. We'll try to answer as much questions as possible during this session. We will also be having a detailed Q&A session after the completion of this topic. Please accept our apologies if your question is not addressed. Due to the high volume of questions that we usually see, we have to be selective. We'll also be issuing our participation certificate to all those who have attended at least 80% of the webinar and have participated in the discussions through the Q&A session. So before we begin with these slides, let's just take a moment to know all the safety exits which are around us. Some of you might be from the comfort of your homes, or you might be in your workplaces, but it's really good that you all know that where the exit path lies in case of any emergency. Furthermore, we should all take care of our health and of those around us. So since this is basically a practical case study that we'll be covering today, we'll be touching the key theoretical and the practical aspects of the well integrity management system in accordance with ISO 16530. This is the agenda, which as you can see on the screen, we'll be going through the Velosi introduction, well integrity overview, standards and regulations, the case study overview, and the software demo in this limited time of 2 hours. We request you all to kindly follow along with us and keep asking in questions to help us in making this as much engaging as possible. Please note that in the case study, the client name and its data have been redacted. We'll be following a practical approach where we'll walk you through the key steps to this case study. I would also like to inform you that Velosi is participating in the EDIPAC, which is to be held from 31st October to 3rd November 2022. Please feel free to visit us, and at our standee, we'll be in hall number 11. Our standee would be 11100. We would love to meet you all. So now I'll be handing it over to Mr. Wajahat, who will be continuing with today's topic. So Wajahat, I think you can start sharing your screen.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wajahat Malik. Thank you very much, Ms. Samia, for a very useful introduction. I'll proceed from here. Most of us are from technical and managerial background, which are somehow related to oil and gas sector. That's why we are attending this webinar. We are very well aware that the first, what you can say, assurance from the industry, energy sector, oil sector is expected to be a safe operation while delivering the product. The same concept, same phenomena, they guide in well integrity as well. When we refer to well integrity, we are basically referring to a safe containment, prevention of escape of fluids, and at the same time maintaining the production from any wellhead, any facility. This is as per definition of ISO 16530 as well. When we are referring to integrity management or well integrity management, we are actually referring to a combination of technical, operational, and organizational processes to ensure a well integrity during its operating life cycle phase. It is further subdivided into certain phases, certain periods of complete life cycle of the well system or the facility itself. When we refer to well management system, it is a process which is documented and supported by a software designed to ensure integrity management of a wellhead over a complete life cycle period. There are certain critical elements that must be addressed at each stage. First and the foremost one is the integrity policy and strategy. Then we are looking for our resource roles and responsibility chart. Generally, we refer to it as RACI charts. Then a risk assessment has to be carried out for all aspects of well integrity management, well barrier analysis and operating limits, well component performance standards, monitoring and surveillance plans, handover procedures, maintenance and pressure management system, well integrity failure management system, management of change, record and integrity reporting, performance monitoring and integrity management system, and the last, the foremost one is the compliance audits. These audits are to be carried out at certain critical stages of the life cycle as well as on a routine basis. Now, during this presentation, we would be seeing some of the abbreviations. Most of them are common abbreviations. Some of them might be specific to our subject. Wherever we are referring to any API recommendation or standards, we are referring to American Petroleum Institute. When we are referring to FMEA, or FMECA, we are referring to failure mode effect analysis as well as failure mode effect criticality analysis as per BS 60812 or IEC 60812 criteria. ID would be referring to internal diameter. KPI is key for performance indicators. Then MAASP, wherever you will see this, it would be a maximum allowable annular surface pressure, whereas the MASP would be maximum allowable surface pressure. MTBF would be mean time between failures, where there are multiple failures occurring on a single component. What is outer diameter? QRA would be quantitative risk assessment. RAM would stand for risk asset metrics, and WIMS would be well integrity management system. Now, before we start with a formal review or discussion on how well integrity is managed or what kind of procedures and processes are generally applied, let's just quickly go through some very basic definitions as per the ISO standard. Endless is basically the space between two tubings, whether it is production, whether it is conductor casing, whether it is surface casing. When we have multiple casings, we are referring to them as A, B, C accordingly. As an example, if we look at any well PNID, we'll be looking at something like that, where we can actually identify each casing independently, and they can be monitored independent of each other during our logging or pressure monitoring systems. Similarly, ambient pressure, we all know it would be the external pressure or the atmospheric pressure on the wellhead itself, and if it is under natural conditions, if it is not subsea. Anomaly would be a condition that is different or deviation from what is expected or the typical value. It can be detected by a theoretical modeling and can be verified through practical examination. Casing liners would be the casing string with its uppermost point side a previous casing string. So, and it is not in the wellhead, so that has to be on top of it. Conductor casing would be the part that is protecting actually the production tubing or the conductor pipe itself. FMEA is a process or a procedure in which a design, development, operation management for the analysis of potential failure modes within a system and for classification of severity and likelihood of the failures. Whereas when the similar procedure is also what you can say added with the additional benefit of criticality assessment, we refer to it as FMECA. MAASP is the greatest pressure that an endless can contain as measured at the wellhead without compromising the integrity. Production casing is actually the production tubing, innermost string of the casing in the well. Sorry, production casing is the casing that is protecting the production tubing actually, which is the last or the innermost casing in the wellhead, whereas the tubing is actually the pipe which is bringing the fluids. Risk assessment is a systematic analysis of the risk from activities and a rational valuation of their significance by comparison against predetermined standards or criteria. SCE or HSCES, as some operators refer to it as, these are basically safety critical elements or equipment, part of a facility, including it can be a software base, it could be hardware, it could be physical asset, whose purpose is to prevent or limit the consequence of a major incident or whose failure could cause or contribute substantially towards a major incident. Surface casing is the outermost casing. Well integrity, containment and prevention of the escape of fluids to subterranean level. We have already referred to it earlier. Integrity management or well integrity management, we already discussed that this is actually a complete procedure or a process through which the well is safely operated within its life cycle. These are some of the industrial standards or applicable standards that are used to regulate well integrity throughout its life cycle. There are risk assessment standards, there are analysis criteria, there are API guidelines, there are actually inspection and testing criteria recommended by API for wellheads in oil and gas sector. Then we are also looking at ISO standards, which are which provide a complete guideline for a life cycle governance as well as the operation phase integrity assurance, including the functional criteria and in some cases, minimum and maximum testing limits as well as time intervals at which a certain test must be carried out for a particular piece of equipment within the well string. First one example here is the API 6A. This one is actually a specification standard that guides regarding the recommendations of a performance dimension, functional interchangeability, design, material, testing, inspection, welding, marking, handling, storing, shipping, purchasing, etc. Anything has to do with wellhead plus chemistry specification or technical criteria, you can refer to 6A. So again, table of contents for 6A. It's more or less what we just explained. The next important standard is 16530 ISO. That is actually integrity, what you can say, life cycle governance standard. There are two parts to it. Part one is life cycle governance, whereas the part two is basically for the operational phase integrity. During the operational or the production life cycle of the well, we are normally referring to part two. This standard applies to all wells that are utilized by the oil and gas industry, regardless of age, type, location, subsea, onshore, offshore, etc. Any type of wellhead, it can be referred by this standard. It provides minimum requirements and further guidance to oil and gas industry how to effectively manage the well integrity during the life cycle. This is the table of content for part one of the standard, and then there is the table of content for part two of the standard, where you can actually see that it refers and explains each component of the wellhead system, including the Christmas tree, the procedures, the life cycle stages of the wellhead. That includes inspection, testing, production, performance monitoring, workover. So all of them, they are referred and explained in detail with examples within this standard. Very good and very helpful standard for well integrity management. Overall scope of this standard, as you can see, part two is mostly towards the operational phase of the standard. So once the handover procedure is completed, well is in operational stage, then this standard will guide through each and every step related to the well integrity. Whereas when you will go back either to intervention or workover, or you will go towards abandonment, then you will have to refer to a different standard for this one. Now, the scope of this technical specification includes a complete description of process required to assess and manage risk with a defined framework. The risk assessment process also applies when deviating from this technical specification. The process of managing well integrity by operating well in compliance with operating limits for all well types that are defined based on exposure to personnel, that is safety, environment, asset damage, or the reputation impact. So all of these factors, they are clearly marked within this standard guideline. The management of well integrity is supported by associated maintenance and monitoring plans, as well as technical reviews and intervals to perform these plans as well. The assessment of existing assets what kind of assessment criteria is required, minimum limits, etc. We'll go in details how this standard gives us some examples. Handover procedure required when acquiring or decommissioning the wellhead for the next phase. Now, when we are talking about operational phase wellhead, that means we are limiting ourselves again to the same parameters as we discussed in the second slide. That is the policy to ensure integrity, RAC matrix, risk assessment, barrier analysis, component and performance standard of each component, monitoring and surveillance plans, handover procedures, maintenance and pressure monitoring or pressure management system, integrity failure management system, management of change, record keeping. By the way, record keeping will be guided through the ISO 14224 criteria. I will go in detail what is the difference between the two criteria, performance monitoring of well management system, and at the end of the day compliance to ensure that application is being performed as required. When we are talking about an integrity policy, we are actually looking for the operator to have its commitment obligation to safeguard personal health, environmental protection, assets, and the reputation by establishing and presenting a well integrity policy or a management system. This policy shall be endorsed by the top level management of any organization. The operator company is also responsible for well integrity management system. That could be a software based system. It is preferred to be a software based system and should clearly indicate how the policy is interpreted as well as applied to this integrity management system. The operator shall define high-level strategic measures to which it is committing in order to achieve the requirement of asset integrity or well integrity in this particular case. The strategic measures, they may include or outline how the operator establishes its business plans and priorities, resourcing and budgeting should be supporting of its well integrity management objective. It should be a high level strategy in itself and can be consistent with the body as well as the complete integrity management system. When we are looking from an organizational point of view, then a clear demarcation of resource roles, responsibilities, and authority levels should be established. In general, this is called RACI or a RACI matrix in common use. In this particular document, basically, it is clearly identified where the life cycle or the integrity management of any asset, how it is, what you can say, who is responsible, how the responsibility has been established, what would be the answerable or you can say responsible identified person. There are categories which include responsible, then accountable, then contribute to the one who's contributing, as well as information only in terms of chain of command. Within this matrix, there is a second level criteria, which is competency establishment. Now, each well operator shall ensure that their personnel, whoever are stakeholders in this integrity management system, they are competent to perform the task assigned to them. Now, the operator shall define well integrity person competency requirement to ensure that the well integrity activities are carried out in a manner, again, which is protecting the personnel, the environment, asset, as well as a competence performance record should be maintained that demonstrates this required compliance. Now, the competency can be gained either through educational programs, training, on hands-on training, on-job training, as we call to them, transfer of knowledge, transfer of expertise. So all these mechanisms of competency assurance, they are equally applicable and acceptable. In the next section of this particular standard, ISO standard, it refers to risk assessment aspects of well integrity. The risk assessment criteria is more or less common as any quantitative risk assessment procedure. How it establishes a proven risk assessment technique are applied and used as a tool to assist in management of well integrity. It identifies the factors that should be considered and introduces evaluation techniques that may be applied when using risk assessment as a basis for establishing the monitoring, surveillance, or maintenance regime, determining which of the barrier elements are considered safety critical, determining an appropriate course of action to address any anomaly, and establishing a risk of loss of containment, that is considering that type of what type of well it is, the potential of the well itself, the environmental impact, the location, the redundancy in the security system, etc. So all of those factors, they have to be considered when they are establishing the overall risk or loss of containment risk from a particular well. Now, barriers are a major, what you can say, cornerstones of managing a well integrity process. Now, the next section in this standard details well barrier analysis. In this part, the barrier envelops, barrier elements, the barrier philosophy, and how the operator can use all of these in a well integrity management system is described in detail. Now, the primary purpose of this integrity management system to have a control over the well production as well as to prevent the loss of containment by any means possible to the environment or even to the exterior well bore to some in I mean most of the cases. This is achieved by employing and maintaining one or more barrier envelopes where required or as necessary. Then we come to a component performance standard. Just like any other asset performance standard for well barriers, there is certain criteria that needs to be met for meeting a minimum performance standard for safe operation of the facility as well as well in the well system. A well component performance standard contains the functionality and acceptance criteria for each of the barrier's safety critical elements. Acceptance criteria for well integrity describes such items as acceptable leak rates, time to close, fail-safe specification, etc. Also describes the required performance standard for well barrier envelopes and associated barrier elements. The section provides example and guidance, including calculation examples for verification of performance standard. The other items to consider when defining a performance standard are functionality, availability, reliability, survivability, failure modes and mechanisms, failure consequences, operating situation conditions, and interaction with other systems. As an example, if we see ISO standard, we refer to something like this. This is normally a safety analysis of function evaluation chart. Is an example provided by the standard. It can change from case to case basis. There are certain criterias which are identified for each wellhead system. So all of them, they provide examples in this particular manner. What type of shut-in pressures are we looking for? What are the alarm levels, etc. And similar templates can be used for maintaining the integrity of any well system. Operator shall identify the operating parameters. This is when we are defining the operability limits of its components, or during the well barrier analysis when we are defining the MAOP as maximum operating pressures, etc. So the well operator shall identify the operating parameters for each well and clearly specify the operating limits for each parameter. The well should not be operated outside of its operating limits. Operating limits should be based on specification of components that make up the well. So the weakest link in the chain concept is used here. Any changes in well configuration, condition, life cycle phase, or status required the well operating limits to be checked and potentially updated. As with life, the well when the production starts to slow down, external interventions are required. We go from natural lift to artificial lift processes. So at that stage, all of these parameters, they need to be reviewed with each MOC or management of change. During a routine operational phase, there are certain monitoring and surveillance criteria. The operator shall also define the monitoring and surveillance requirements to ensure that wells are operated within their operating envelopes. The well operator shall determine the frequency of monitoring and surveillance based on the risk and consequence of breaching the barrier envelopes and the ability to respond to any abnormal condition or anomaly. By the way, there are some minimum requirements which are specified in the API as well as the ISO standard. For example, subsurface and surface safety equipment, there is a minimum testing interval. You cannot, sorry, there's a maximum allowed testing interval. So even the operator can determine the frequency of monitoring and surveillance. The testing interval for those SCEs, they have to be followed within the standard guidelines. Then Monitoring is the observation of operating parameters of a well via instrumentation, via lens system, or a predefined frequency to ensure that they remain within its operating limit. For example, pressure, temperature, flow rates, etc. Compositions also come into the picture at some stage. Then surveillance part is actually recording of physical characteristics of a well, while whether you're monitoring the wall thickness, whether you're taking the multi-pronged crawler measurements, whether you're doing visual inspections, boroscopy, etc., or sampling is being done. So all of these techniques, they will come within the surveillance part. Then comes another important aspect of integrity management or inspection of wellhead system itself. When in the routine monitoring of any wellhead system, the most common inspection and most easily applied technique is the annular pressure management system. As soon as one of the casings is going to allow flow of fluids through its surface or through its sheet, the pressure system will get disturbed, and that is the first indication that will allow the operator to identify that something has gone wrong at some stage. Hanger joints are damaged, cementing job is affected, production packers are loose, something has gone wrong. So the first line of indication that you get is from the pressure monitoring system. Well operator imposed endless pressure is the pressure that is deliberately applied to any endless as a part of well operating requirements. Typically, this can be gas lift, gas in the endless A, or applied pressure in endless A in order to protect against the collapse risk from the trapped annular pressure B or on the subsea wells. Thermally induced annular pressure is a pressure in a trapped endless volume that is caused by the thermal changes occurring within the well itself, whereas a sustained annular pressure (SAP) is a pressure which occurs in endless that rebuilds after having been bled off and cannot be attributed to the well operator imposed or thermally induced pressure. Now, this sustained endless pressure is of a particular concern as it can be indicative of a failure of one or more barrier elements which enables communication between a pressure source and the well analysis system. After pressure monitoring, then the standard guides us through the handover procedures. Now, the handover is actually a process which is a formal transfer of well from its operating condition or the operating responsibility and is endorsed by the use of a related well handover documentation. Well operator shall verify the well operating limits within the well handover process. The process shall define as a minimum the following phases at which well handover typically occurs. One is at the construction phase or from construction to operation handover, production operation to maintenance for intervention, servicing, or work over something, and then back again to production operation. And the last one would be from production operation to abandonment phase. These handovers during the well life cycle should include only those items that are appropriate and capture any changes in well configuration or its operating limits. When it comes to maintenance, we are looking for any means by which the continued availability or reliability as well as the condition of well barrier and valves, barrier elements, valves, chemistry, actuators, or the control systems are periodically tested, function tested, serviced, or repaired. Generally, the pressure containing parts are not repaired, but yes, the monitoring and control parts, they are maintainable most of the time. When we are saying maintenance, it is conducted to inspect, test, repair the equipment to ensure that it remains within the original operating specifications. Planned maintenance is the one that is pre-planned and it is performed at a certain predetermined interval or a frequency. There are two maintenance that are generally carried out for any, by the way, there are three now, but conventionally there were two maintenance types that are carried out for any wellhead system. The preventive, which is planned through your CMS or SAP system. Corrective is when a failure has been identified, and now the new regime is predictive or condition based, in which certain inspection techniques are actually carried out at certain intervals to identify any failure prior to its occurrence. So, to avoid corrective maintenance, the regime is moving towards more condition based inspections or predictive maintenance. Okay, when it comes to there is a question from one of the candidates. Four colors does the well integrity level categorization. No, those are risk levels. What is the main principle behind? Yeah, those are risk levels. We'll go in the detail how risk levels are identified for any system or any assets, and then we will define the four different layers. The well operator shall establish process, that is when we are referring to the complete integrity management system. The well operator shall establish a process that describes the management of risk associated with the failures of a barrier envelope or well barrier elements against their performance standards. Now, these can also be guided by a local legislation, industrial standard, best practices, operator experience, or the criteria specified in the standards. Like you can see an example of well monitoring model, I mean a corrective response model, where a Christmas tree valve, it is being monitored for high pressure, well offshore, whether it is a subsea free flowing well. So there are certain levels assigned to it, and end of the day, the product of this criteria defines the overall prioritization of any, what you can say, preventive or corrective task within a well system. The process shall describe the course of action to correct the failure based on the number of barriers or barrier element that remain functional, the level of redundancy of barrier or the barrier elements of the well itself. Like we are discussing all the well barrier elements here, and how, under what conditions they are being employed here. The operator shall apply a management of change MOC process to address and record changes in the integrity assurance requirement for an individual well or to the well integrity management system. Again, the operator shall apply a deviation process where a certain process cannot be carried out. A risk assessment has to be carried out to apply a temporary non-compliance to the integrity management system. These deviations shall be time-bound, and if they are extended, the risk assessment should be re-evaluated, or it should have covered an extended period of time to start with. The approval process may escalate in approval levels within the well operated organization, like a higher level approval may be required if you want to extend a certain bypass within the system for a temporary time period. The last element is actually record maintenance and well integrity reporting. Keeping the complete records for any asset is necessary, but when it comes to critical systems like production wells, then it is necessary to keep all the authorized users, all the informations that has been observed during the history of the well. It should be logged and should be kept accurately to determine the exact status of the integrity as well as the barrier elements. Additionally, the users, the authorized users here it is referring to, can ensure or demonstrate that maintenance, testing, inspection, repair, and replacement is being performed in accordance with the requirement of integrity management system. Next is a short case study for one of the risk assessment studies that was carried out for a multi-well system production, injection, artificial lift, natural lift, gas lift, etc. So we'll just go through a very brief case study. In this particular case study, the main concern was the wellhead Christmas tree, or you can say anything excluding the downhole system, starting from the subsurface safety level all the way up to the choke valve or the battery limit of the what you can say well boundary. In fact, I was showing an example of one of the PNIDs, how a wellhead battery limit generally looks like. This is what this study was capturing for this particular case. So starting from triple SV level or double CSV level and going all the way up to the choke valve. So within this case study, you will find the general observation, general procedures that are required to perform a risk assessment to ensure the integrity of a production wellhead. We, in this particular case study, Velosi team actually carried out FMECA based risk assessment for one of the wellhead system and developed a complete set of inspection and maintenance plan as a part of the service. It was done by a multidisciplinary team. I mean, there are different type of assets involved. The control team is there, the static part is there, the well downhole integrity team is there, and obviously each one they have their own knowledge base and experience. It was amalgamated into one single solution, that is Velosi Well Integrity Management Solution. The confidence factor was based on the team's experience and judgment, together with an understanding of the process system and operation of wellheads. Failure modes were determined from design, inspection, maintenance history, as well as operator experience. You can also refer to generic reliability databases for such cases as well. Now, the main objective here was, first of all, to ensure that a complete engineering database is available. By the way, I'll just quickly answer some of the questions before we start with the case study objectives. A gentleman has asked an example of safety critical elements. Any example? Yes, your subsurface safety valves, they are considered SCE. Your wellhead control panel, again SCE. Pressure relief system on the wellhead, that is SCE. So there are many examples when it comes to wallet systems. Okay, what data should a well handover contain? We'll give you an example for that one shortly afterwards. This is as per ISO criteria. An example is already available in the standard itself. Normally, if I answer your question, the example we wait, normally it is something like this, like you have a complete schematic, or when the wellhead is handed over, with this schematic you will get complete maintenance plans, your operating conditions, etc. So there are multiple forms that are available in the standard that will be provided during the handover procedure. What would be, well, would be confirmed uncontrollable crossflow with no potential of breach to the surface be categorized at? It depends. When you have a cross flow and there is no breach to the surface, but are you affecting any environmental clause here? Are you affecting your production, what you can say, composition here? So yes, it does matter even if there is no surface breach. When it comes to surface breach, then we are looking at a much worse condition than a simple crossover. Right, so now the main objective of this particular case study was risk assessment and developing a maintenance system for an existing wellhead. We can There were multiple wellheads within this system. So for an existing CPF, actually, the complete study was carried out. And within the scope of this study, risk assessment with the provision of WIMS software was included. Complete failure mechanism identification, risk assessment, failure, what you can say, classification, failure mitigation techniques, they were covered. Bear with me for 1 second, please. Sorry about that. There's an urgent call, I had to take it. And then probability estimates were made. Normally, when we are making probabilistic estimation, we are referring to the failure history of the operator. If the failure history is not available, then we refer to similar facilities within the region. If that is not available, then you can go beyond it and use experience of your team members. You can use generic reliability databases, or take a similar facility from around the world. Facilities are not generally designed individually. There are replicable similar facilities somewhere around the world. So from there, the failure history is normally estimated. However, as per the conditions of operating conditions of each well, each environmental conditions, some of the probabilistic estimates, they need to be updated as well from case to case basis. Then a complete consequence of failure, identification of complete failure fact on the primary and the secondary function of the system itself. Same RCM topologies, they were applied. Identification of causes that are contributing towards a bigger failure, identification of items that can be maintained or can be replaced in a wellhead system to mitigate the failure from occurring again, establish a complete risk level for the well equipment, especially for the SCE assets or the critical control equipment. So that was carried out. Provide the recommendation and propose improvements to manage the risk to an acceptable industrial level. Average, basically ALARP. We all know that wherever there is a risk identified, we need to make it as minimum as possible or mitigate it as much as possible. As a part of this study, complete risk assessment of wellhead, casing, tubing, valve, associated flanges, instrument was carried out, and optimization of inspection and maintenance temporal as per the standard criteria of ISO and API was performed. Content of this document covers the development of inspection and maintenance regime for the wellhead equipment, again the same equipment. The assessment also encompassed a detailed review and analysis of wellhead casings, tubings, valves, various operational inspection and maintenance aspects, and identification of applicable internal external failure modes which can pose a threat to the integrity of the well safe operation. This summary, to sum it up in few words, is basically just saying that as per ISO 15630 criteria, phase 2 it was, not phase 1, and the IEC 60812 risk evaluation criteria, this risk assessment was carried out. It was based on the engineering condition and engineering documents, engineering design, as well as the operating conditions of the wellheads. The way it was done was including the casings starting from the subsurface level all the way to the choke valve. It was defined as the battery limit of this particular risk assessment study. This is actually a dashboard screenshot of the software that was used for this particular study. We will go in a brief review of the software itself. In fact, Ma'am Samia, if she's available, she will present some very useful aspects of this software. I'll just give you a very quick brief what this software was all about. It's actually our in-house proprietary software. There are different modules for different purpose. Like you can have it for static equipment, you can have it for rotating equipment, you can have it for relief system maintenance, inspection maintenance, etc. But here, the particular case that we are referring to is the integrity management system of the VAIL-Plant software. Within this system, this hierarchy that you see, the system hierarchy was designed as per ISO criteria. When we say ISO criteria, we are referring to ISO 14224. Any latest edition should be fine because they keep updating some of the very crucial values or very crucial information within the standard. It's an example of a subsea wellhead across mystery. You can find them onshore wellheads in this one as well. How it is defined, what kind of what you can say battery limits you can define for a risk assessment, what kind of equipment lie within the battery limit of control limit of the uh, wellhead itself, the role of triple SVs or SCSSVs, how they help in preventing certain things, what kind of maintenance, what you can say, regime needs to be applied, how the subunit or the unit complete description should be defined. So all these information you find it in ISO 14224. It's very well elaborated standard. It also gives you a very good idea of what kind of minimum engineering parameters need to be recorded for design or risk assessment purpose. Similarly, for inspection, because this standard is actually for maintenance data collection. So what are the minimum engineering parameters you need to record for maintenance or inspection system? So you find complete details like what kind of things are required. Similarly, here you will find what you can say each purpose of each element of the wellhead, how a certain condition can actually affect the wellhead performance or the integrity, what major equipment or assets would be affected under certain conditions, the consequence or the causes of failure. To some extent it also guides you to that extent. So similarly, keep going, it will go to risers, etc. But yes, this is the standard that is used to develop the hierarchy of a system, the barrier elements, the different analysts, the production system, production tubing, production control, your wellhead, what you can say, intervention system, BOPs, kill wings, etc. Wellhead control panels, all of them are addressed individually within this software. We'll go in detail how this software performs the risk assessment at a later stage of this presentation. So using the VAIL-Plant software, this complete assessment was carried out. 135 well systems were actually addressed in this case study. Then total number of assets or the individual components that were addressed was 3313. They were further subdivided into 4 risk categories, as one of my colleagues just asked, like what was those colors referring to, and there were 9 equipment types or equipment categories as per ISO criteria, like object types. And based on the risk assessment, 200 equipment were identified as medium risk, 1,700 were ranked again into medium risk. I believe the first statement should have read, oh, okay, sorry, they were high risk. Then 1744 were medium risk, and then 700 equipment were identified in low risk category. They were mostly related to production effects, not related to safety effects. In fact, this was the risk matrix. Now the risk matrix, We need a semi-quantitative risk matrix for any kind of FMECA-based risk assessments. Within the risk matrix, it depends on the client, depending on their HAZOP or COMA studies, what kind of risk has been identified, how the risk levels have been categorized. Normally, most of the clients in oil and gas industry, they refer to the API risk matrix, the 5 by 5 criteria. Same is quoted by IC 60812 as well. So in this particular risk matrix, you can have 4 risk levels. You can have 5 consequence or the COF as we call them, and 5 probability levels. As I said, the risk matrix varies from client to client, so we'll not go in too much detail of what this is. But this particular one is as per API as well as ISO's criteria, as I explained. Then inspection and maintenance strategies were developed, or there were obviously there were some maintenance regime, some very good inspection regime was already present with the client. However, with the help of this study, multiple improvements were made, especially the minimum evaluation or inspection criteria for certain assets. It was added. Similarly, there were assets which were being over maintained, so they were removed using the RCM methodology. Like if something does not needs to be maintained under certain conditions, and you are spending on that one, so that one is also covered as a part of this risk-based well integrity management system. Then it was also recommended to improve the history recording. This is a common, we can say, observation within oil and gas industry. Previous history, especially before 2010, most of the operators, they struggle to maintain that history. Now with time, the new knowledge base and the recording mechanisms are now created, and the history records in recent years have improved a lot. Now our clients, when we talk about Velosi, I think more than 60% of clients are following the ISO criteria nowadays. How we approached this particular study, this risk assessment study, let me just quickly go over a few of the questions which are being asked. And can a well with the tubing stream leak above the DHC field in a green category? So that depends on your as of study, whether you have defined it in such a way. Whether do you have a sustained casing pressure in the well, what evaluation should be carried out, needs to be guided by your integrity management system, and as defined by the API criteria, please refer to 14A specifications. I want to know what should be okay. Please email to our team regarding the certificates. Third maintenance you wanted to talk about. Okay, there's a question. Third maintenance was actually predictive or the condition based. I think I've already explained it. Okay, no further questions. Now, to proceed with this particular case example, what we did, we carried out FMECA analysis for all the well components, each individual barriers. Can you show us an FMECA template example? Yes, I'll show you show an FMECA template example in a while. We'll show you the complete process how it is done. During this analysis criteria, as I mentioned earlier, IC 60812 was carried out, and guideline for ISO 16530 was utilized. Now the FMECA process, it relies heavily on the functional failures, whether it is partial or total failure, what kind of failure categorization or modes it can be grouped into, the causes of those failures contributing towards the mode, failure effects on the system, the primary secondary functions of the system, influencing factors or the root causes, then the failure criticality on certain consequence criteria as per the client risk matrix. Generally, it is personal safety, environmental impact. It can have financial impact, whether it is production, whether it is asset damage. You can also have another criteria, which is the company reputation, which is at stake in case of a major event. The FMECA process is supported by a Velosi database and other published generic reliability databases. We can normally refer to ORIDA for most of the cases, especially when it's related to well integrity and offshore assets. Overall process looks something like this for FMECA study, or this is basically RCM based approach. It is modified to suit the well integrity requirement. Here, the asset register development or update as per ISO criteria, the function analysis, functional failure identification, failure mode identification or selection, failure effect analysis, your operating failures, causes and maintainable item contributing towards the modes, failure criticality or risk of failure. Now, the assessment of the wellhead components, then reliability, availability, and maintenance review, and The last part is the inspection and maintenance plan or update of inspection and maintenance plan according to the analysis or the study. This is a division of what was being mentioned on the first slide. There were 3313 assets and approximately 117 well heads. This is a screenshot of how the engineering data is generally logged as per ISO criteria. If I use the similar example from the software itself, there are some basic engineering parameters and then there are some advanced engineering parameters. I'll just go to the engineering data part. It's acting slower than expected. Let's give it a minute because I think there's a lot of database in this one. But anyways, then there are some generic engineering criteria that are associated with all kind of equipment to be maintained. And then there are some specific well integrity related criteria also, like for specific equipment that needs to be logged specifically, sorry, especially when we are talking about a wellhead system. Then the technical parameters of specification, they make a lot of difference. The overall pressure containment criteria that needs to be addressed, kind of protection that is being employed, what kind of cellar inspections or below cellar inspections are being carried out. So all of that has to be a part of the engineering database. Somebody has asked what about the API criteria. See, API, as I said, you can start with if you go back to the second slide, there are many API standards starting from 14A to 14L. They guide you through different operational and life cycle phases of the wellhead. Some of them are actually related to inspection planning and maintenance as well. So yes, API standards are definitely referred in each stage of well life cycle management. This is another view of how the bulk data is can be represented using the same software. The next step is the function analysis. This function analysis is basically what the software is showing right now, what kind of function a particular well system is performing, what kind of performance criteria is there, what kind of hierarchy or system hierarchy is being represented by a certain wellhead system. So all of these parameters, they are captured by this integrity management software. Function analysis, it has to be done in certain stages. We are talking about Christmas tree, then the directly produced fluids from the well into the flow line or the production tree, where there is water injection, then it will be an injection tree. Then they regulate the fluid flow through the choke system, manual or motorized choke well, whatever the configuration is. Monitor the well parameters at the level of the tree, pressure monitoring, NLS monitoring, composition monitoring, etc. Then safely stop the flow of fluids produced or injecting by means of valves actuated by a control system, that is your protection system. Inject into the well or the flow line the protection fluids, inhibitors, corrosion inhibitors, hydrates, etc., hydrate prevention, etc. So then you can provide a tool access to the swab line of the tree itself. You can use the kill line to actually pressurize the system itself. These function requirements of wells are wellhead are identified by API 14C and are also defined by a subsea handbook that is referred here. There are other you can say documented criteria as well for the similar activities. In this step, a function analysis of a complete wellhead system or the Christmas tree system with associated assets is performed. How it was designed, what was the what you can say engineering limitations or operating limits, then how it is interacting with the topside system, what kind of control is there, what kind of prevention is there, then what kind of regulation is being performed. So all of these individual elements, they are a part of the function analysis of any wellhead system. This function analysis is further carried out during the failure mode effect and criticality analysis. What is actually being done, each individual element to perform, which is performing its function within the functional flow of a wellhead control system, is addressed individually. Failure modes are identified at the asset level for the critical assets. For each failure mode, the patterns are identified, causes are identified, causes or the effects contributing towards that failure are identified, overall consequence and the system-wise consequences identified. Once this criteria is fulfilled for each mode, then a suitable recommendation needs to be identified. At the same stage, a reliability assessment is also being carried out that we can see from the software screen itself. There is a probabilistic assessment which is being carried out, whether it is based on operator data, whether it is based on the generic data. The probability of failure ranges are extracted, or we can say implemented as per the client risk matrix. These, as I said, it is a semi-quantitative risk matrix. So therefore, these ranges can change from client to client. According to the range, a probability of factor range has to be identified. This probability of factor is then combined with the consequence of you can say each failure based on against the consequence criteria as defined the matrix. We have been seeing four consequence criteria so far in this presentation: financial, environment, personal safety, business, and you can have repetition here as well. So based on each criteria, like when we are looking for a safety criteria, you can have a level 1 assessment, you can have a level 2 assessment, or you can go for a much more detailed assessment in which each item will be addressed in a higher level of detail, so it can guide us to a better consequence assessment. But this level 3 is normally carried out for critical equipment. Level 1 and 2 are carried out for medium critical equipment or non-major assets, as you can say. Similarly, environmental assessment can be carried out, capital assessment can be carried out, and end of the day, based on the failure mode, identified risk, identified probability, and overall risk of the asset itself is calculated for each failure mode. From these failure modes, then the consequence assessment or the risk assessment is again compiled to make the overall risk of the asset under certain conditions, under certain failures. Then for each mode of failure or the each condition, a certain recommendation or a remedial action is identified. For example, let's just look at surface safety valve. Ms. Samia, can you please check the software? It's responding very slow. Right. I'll come to the recommendation part from the software as well, but it would look something to what is being displayed within the slide as well. That for each mode will make a certain suitable recommendation. What kind of inspection should be carried out? What kind of logging for the well system should be carried out, etc. Then the functional failure analysis is done. The functional failure analysis is basically the failure or a loss of function or any equipment that is considered within the study limits. As an example, for the total loss of function or partial loss of function, a subsurface safety valve example has been used. If it fails to isolate the production valve from the tree, well, then that is total failure. If it is just passing and it is not closing properly when it is required to, that is a partial failure, but under certain cases it can be a total failure as well. Isolate the production valve from Christmas tree and production manifolds, that is if the valve is leaking, then that is a partial failure. Keep the process fluids isolated from the environment, that is it should not leaking within the system, but it is actually leaking externally. So again, that is referred to as a partial failure because it can also be captured, since this is a subsurface valve, it can also be captured by the further protection layers that we have, the surface safety valves. Here in this example now, it's an example of the reliability data, how it will be booked for each failure mode. This reliability data here, it is coming from generic reliability database, because in this particular case the operator history is not available for this particular failure mode. Based on the reliability data, in the next stage, a probability of failure will be assigned. Here, you will see a certain probability of failure has been assigned where the risk is being calculated according to each failure mode. If I go back one step, this reliability database is preferred to be coming from the operator history. However, if it is not coming from operator history, then certain adjustments are allowed to be made based on our experience or on the industrial practices. Within that experience, you will actually find that within the failure mode, it needs to be well designed in a way to capture all causes contributing towards the failure of that particular equipment, whether it is total loss of the equipment, partial loss of the function. So all of those causes, they have to be addressed in detail. Once the listing of failure mode is made, then it is easier to functional break down the system. These failure modes have been incorporated into VAIL-Plant module as well, so you can just pick and choose from there as well according to the applicable causes. This is an example how these failure modes are already available in the databases for all the well integrity related assets. Once you have selected a certain failure mode, then the failure effect needs to be described in detail. What kind of effect a certain mode will have, whether it is partial or a total failure, it will still have an effect on the system, whether it will have an effect on the safety, whether it will have an effect on the production or financial losses, etc. So that needs to be detailed into the software. The description also needs to describe whether the failure has become evident to the operating crew or evident to the operating crew under normal circumstances. So that is actually a class of failure, whether it is hidden or evident. So if it can be detected or not, that data is also input into the system. Once the operating failure and causes are identified, then we move further to identify the proper maintainable item to arrest these failures, whether the replacement of these items in time or a certain functional test of these items within time, for example, a hydraulic control panel can arrest a certain type of failure to occur in future. And end of the day, just like I said, we'll take the probability, we'll take the 4 consequence assessment or 5 consequence assessments as per the client risk matrix. We'll produce a product of the two, which will define the overall risk of our individual asset. Now, this risk of the asset itself will again depend on the functional hierarchy of the asset, whether this risk or the criticality can affect the tree upstream of that asset. When, for example, when we are talking about any single component within the system, whether this component will move upwards and contribute towards the risk of the risk to the wellhead, or this component will only have a partial impact on the process or operation of the wellhead only. So all those parameters, they will also be evaluated in detail. The risk is here is identified as the function of frequency, that is number of events, which is basically probability of failure, and the consequence. The risk categories are specified for each failure mode, and these results are applied when going through the decision logic to finally arrive at a preferred or optimal operational activity, basically inspection or maintenance or mitigation task. Now, this is the same risk matrix that we were looking at before, but this is as just defined as per API criteria. There are certain factors, the consequence factors, elaborated further how these factors are grouped into a certain consequence factor that we saw, what kind of overall risk it will make when we are assessing a single component within the system. When we say high, whether the probability was too high or whether the consequence of that particular asset on the overall system was too high. So all these things, they are actually referred within the detailed risk matrix, something like this. These matrices are also built into the software and they can be updated on client needs. Within the software, the POF, COF, and the risk level is calculated for each failure mode and each asset. Then it is calculated as an overall risk for the particular asset. For example, here we see that since all the 4 factors are making it a low consequence equipment, therefore the overall risk of the asset itself will also be shown as low. If any one of them is going to a higher risk level, then automatically that would be the guiding factor within the risk assessment criteria. Same example repeated for all 3, 4 different factors as I discussed. Now, when it comes to probability of failure, probability is basically just the number of events over a certain period of time. In any semi-quantitative risk matrix, probability is represented in certain ranges. Sometime it could be as per SIL requirement, it can go up to 1000 years. Sometime it is as per reliability requirement, and some of the time it is completely qualitative assessment. When we are performing risk assessment using BS60812 criteria, we need a reliability risk matrix, which is as per API requirements. A rank or the category probability class with a verbal description low, medium, high, or very high can be used. Like there are different levels that the client has of study or comma report can identify. It can maximum go up to 6 levels, but it can be less than that as well, which is mostly the case. Probability ranges, as I said, they need to be defined in terms of reliability ranges of the assets in question. This is the same example as you are looking within the software as well. The probability ranges will depend on the generic or the operator reliability data. Once the generic or the operator reliability data has been incorporated into the system, a certain probability range will automatically be selected. If you are referring to a generic reliability data like ORIDA, EXIDA, or Faraday, or any other generic reliability data, you will always find that the statistical data will always have low, mean, and upper designations. These are basically under which conditions the equipment was being operated. All these databases, they clearly define what a low or mean means and how an upper range should be used in adverse maintenance conditions or adverse operating conditions. Mean failure rate is obtained by ORIDA estimator. It is basically the mean failure rate among the installations for which the data has been collected. Then there is a 90% uncertainty interval for failure rate, and interval covering 90% of the variations between the multiple example and multiple installations within ORIDA. And statistical analysis and standard deviation has already been calculated in this database for you. This slide is basically referring to ORIDA again and again, so I'll just elaborate a little bit what how this works and how this database is used. This is an example of a generic reliability data for a subsea Christmas tree. In this particular case, what they have done is they have calculated the data from multiple installations, multiple asset populations, and different locations. Here, they actually define the failure modes to some extent for individual equipment type. Those modes are then categorized into different categories, whether they are critical failures, degraded failures, or they are failures that can develop into one of those. The complete statistical deviation you will find here. You will have all the three failure rates as I was referring to, an estimated time to repair you can find, and an operational failure analysis or failure mean time between failure is also provided for reference. So where the operator data is not sufficient to supplement the study or not sufficient to perform the analysis, then such generic reliability databases can be referred. This is an example of failure rate per hour from the same database that we were referring to. Now, the next one is consequence of failure. When we're talking about consequence of failure, we know that there are 4 consequence classes that we have already defined as per any operator's risk matrix, or 5 consequence classes for that matter. But here there are some, what you can say, adjustments and assumptions that need to be made. For example, the type of fluid surface, the size of opening that is basically directly proportional to the release volume, whether it is lethal or non-lethal surface, toxic or non-toxic surface. So these factors, they need to be addressed independent of the consequence assessment, and they should be incorporated within the consequence assessment as an adjustment. Now in the next part, when we are referring to a consequence of failure, there is a correlation with the repeating failures consequence and new failure consequence. There's another adjustment that depends on the mean time between failure. If a failure has been noted in the history multiple times, that means some remedial action is already present in the system. It just needs to be optimized. However, if a very serious failure is expected to happen, but it is not observed within the meantime failure analysis, then we need to address it independently, and a certain mitigation task or an inspection task needs to be assigned within the consequence assessment. This is an example of different level of consequence assessment. We'll just looking at it from in the software as well. Like depending on the risk metrics, you'll have 4 or 5 consequence criteria, and within each criteria you'll have different level of assessment. End of the day, the product of probability as well as the consequence will provide you the risk level of a particular asset itself. The highest risk within the asset failure modes will actually be the guiding or the bottleneck risk for that particular asset. If it is in one of the critical failure modes, then a maintenance or inspection criteria needs to be defined. If it is one of the non-critical failure modes, then a monitoring criteria will be defined accordingly. This is an example. Somebody asked if we have an example of FMECA template. This is how an FMECA template looks like. This is more or less what you were looking at in the software as well. It's just like the complete thing is presented within one page. Here, You can see a high risk wellhead valve. Basically, this is a WSV, and the flange may be high risk due to either a high probability of failure or high consequence of failure. Therefore, both mutually exclusive elements affect the risk individually, making a final combined risk level. So they are talking about a combination of two systems where each of them might be medium risk, but a combination would lead to a high risk element. The probability of failure and the consequence of failure are evaluated independently of each other. Example of a risk ranking and criticality against failure mode for a surface safety valve is given in the right example, right? This is the one that he's referring to, the Finicia template. Calculation of the risk, just like we have seen before, depending on where that particular equipment is evaluated within the risk matrix, it will be plotted in the same cell. So this risk matrix will then give you a distribution according to each risk level within the matrix. For example, if it is a 5 by 5 matrix, so you're looking at the 25 cells that each of them will have certain small number, is basically the number of assets which are identified within this particular step of risk level. So this matrix is actually presenting where each equipment lies within the system. Some of them could be at a higher probability range, but still a lesser risk range. Some of them could be at a lesser probability range, but a higher risk range within the matrix. The same example again. This is one of the final steps in which overall risk ranking for system or set of assets is plotted to represent a complete wellhead system. Now, this is a software generated report, the VAIL-Plant report. Basically, here it shows a single wellhead system with individual components and their risk level that or the risk threat that they pose to the system itself. You can also add additional remarks. Gives a very good idea of which is a high consequence equipment and which is a high probability of failure equipment within this chart. So these type of reports can be generated for individual wellheads at the end of the day once the analysis is done. You can also have a history portfolio to the wellhead system itself. If I go into the detail of the history portfolio, you can have history records, you can have PMR, the preventive maintenance records. You can view them in different formats, whether you want in form view, you can have different type of reports produced from it. So the one we were just referring to was just one example report from the same system. Once this report is added with the history, what you can say, records or the routine logs. So this gives a very good picture of where a certain wellhead lies, whether it is a high criticality wellhead with a metal loss being observed, the crawler inspection is showing some issues, the detailed casing log is showing some issues, inflow testing is reflecting some problems, or the failure history is very rich as compared to other similar facilities. So that gives you a very good idea of where a particular wellhead lies in terms of its maintenance, what you can say, regime, whether it needs to be improved, whether it needs to decrease the maintenance, what kind of inspection techniques further needs to be employed, like your CP protection system, it is being evaluated, your acoustic, I mean, logging is being done, boroscopy is there, the caliper inspection, the multi-finger caliper inspection, eddy current, etc., etc. So all those inspection techniques, you can log them with their complete results and the data types here. As again, a detailed tubing inspection template. Then you have a detailed casing log inspection template. You can also have a corrosion coupon inspection. You can also have fluid analysis, CP system, FIV, chemical injection systems. Complete logging is available within the system for historical data storage as well as for analysis purpose. Now, in the next step, once this data is populated in the system, analysis has been performed, then our team, that is, we are referring to the case study that we were just reviewing, our team, what they did, they performed a maintenance, what you can say, review, maintenance system review with each type of maintenance that is being carried out. They carried out a detailed review and provided some update recommendations, whether like in some cases inflow testing if it is required, whether in some cases endless pressure monitoring is showing some concerns, whether a caliper inspection is being required. So most of these techniques recommended are condition-based inspections, because what we are at the end of the day trying to do is to avoid workovers and avoid corrective maintenance. But wherever there is a corrective maintenance task available in the history, Such reports, they are reviewed in detail to ensure that the new maintenance regime which is being recommended can actually mitigate the failures that are observed in the past history. In this particular example, there is only one single valve passing event, and later on it was found out that the leak rate was acceptable as per API 14B. But this particular example of wellhead, there was no major integrity event that was identified. Then, as I said, a future inspection sketch is prepared. What type of inspection is required? What kind of logistic requirements are required? The task that needs to be carried out, etc., etc. Seller inspection criteria and the templates are there within the software. This is like an example that is filled for a wellhead in the casing system. For complete below cellar inspection, you can have the complete material specifications, IDODs, well identification. You can have the overall condition, etc. These are some of the report samples. That one on the right side is a risk report sample. With the risk assessment criteria that we were just reviewing, the risk matrix based risk assessment criteria with the preventive recommendations. Whereas on the left hand side, you can see an integrity management dashboard where it is actually providing you the complete engineering log of the wellhead system itself. This is probably one single wellhead. Yes, one single oil production wellhead for which it is providing this example. End of the day, then as with any study, any analysis, end of the day, there are some recommendations that finding. That was the same case in this particular study as well. It was identified that overall the system appears to be satisfactory. However, there was no formal schedule-based task associated with maintenance activities. It's a very common practice in most of the operators. Problem is, well sites are normally located in very hard to approach areas. The maintenance teams, they tend to ignore them or prolong the maintenance schedule for as much as possible due to any reason, whether it is safety, security, approach, execution, but they try to prolong this. And to do this, normally deferments are taken. Just like I was explaining in the beginning of this presentation, when such deferments are allowed, then there should be a time limit on such deferments under a given condition. It should not be a permanent case where there is no formal schedule-based maintenance task, because this way you are actually exposing the system towards a failure to happen. It was observed that inspection and maintenance history is being recorded for each wellhead. This particular client, they had a very good logging mechanism with them. From the inspection history, it was observed there are few cases of valve passing and loose flanges. That is understandable. There's a lot of vibration in the system. Hazard effect registers were present, and control scheme was also present. Maintenance history was also present. However, in this case, since there was no operator surveillance or operator driven reliability concept for this particular operator, there were cases where actually bolts were missing from the flanges, and they were external leakage in multiple cases. So there were some recommendations to actually cater for this one. Mostly it is to do with monitoring and bolt tightening recommendations. Okay, then there is another vendor recommendation. Now, the next major conclusion in this case was that the available data or the processes, narratives were suitable. Recommendation have been made for the inspection and maintenance planning system. That's fine. Maintenance regime was found to be satisfactory, where the equipment vendor is carrying out the routine maintenance, so it is subcontracted job. It was recommended that detailed reports of such maintenance should be captured as per ISO criteria. It's to do with data capturing. There has not been a major failure in the provided maintenance log. Minor leakages were there. That's fine. So accordingly, certain recommendations were made. One of the major recommendation that the functional testing as per standard should be there. IPI standards guides a certain interval for functional testing of the surface safety and subsurface safety valves. Similarly, there is a pressure testing requirement for the downhole equipment, including the Christmas tree. There is a reaction time requirement for the actuators that needs to be met. That was another one of the recommendation. Valve lubrication, just like with any other operator, the wellhead integrity team, they also tend to ignore this activity. However, it should be done at least once in a year, because otherwise, when you need the manual valves and they are not operating or they're not performing the job, then there's no point of having that particular isolation, and that is like a secondary barrier failure, which can be very disastrous in under an anomalous condition. There is a recommendation for visual surveillance. Bolt tightening was there, bolt plug recommendation was there, condition fixture working platform should be checked for integrity, gasket and flanges, they need to be checked. That, as I said, that there were some cases of leakage as well. Choke calibration records should be maintained. Inspection plans should be there. Then our complete database in the CMMS should be there. Assets should not be missing in your database. Retrieval and reinstallation checklist were not present, so they were provided. History files, the history was in a good condition, but not in a formal condition. The landing collar, production tree, liner, tree cap, etc. The details were missing from there. Uh, Analysis reports were not available. Procedure for SESSV or the triple SV was provided. Installation records as per ISO criteria, they were not there. So then, as a final outcome of the study, a concise project report was produced. This project report addressed all the issues that we have seen in the previous slide, and they were addressed with suitable recommendations. Now, I would like to hand it over back to Ms. Samia. She will give us a good brief of how this well integrity management software works basically and how it helps our integrity management team or the reliability team to assess the condition of any wellhead system. Ms. Samia, over to you, please.
Yes, Mr. Jaha, just give me a minute. Let me know if you're able to see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. So this is basically our wellhead integrity management system. As Mr. Vijay has explained, that we are using this system for performing the activities for the end user. When we click on this wellhead integrity management system, the first screen, as you can see over here, is the dashboard. Over here, there are various integrity parameters like well risk, equipment risk, inspection PM activities, reliability, leaks, failure replacement, and logging results. So what we are showing in the well risk is basically what are the various types of risks that are related to this well, like high, medium, low, and the ones which are not calculated. So there are two notations for it. One is by the category itself, and the other one is by the means of this graph. Like over here, if you see that currently for this system, for this demo system, we have 91 wells which have the risk which is medium high. 44 are medium, and currently there is no low. So they're also depicted in the form of this graph. Similarly, when we talk about the equipment risk over here, we are showing the risk which is equipment wise, which is high, medium, and low. Then any inspection PM plant maintenance activity which is scheduled for in the future, we can show over here how many were planned, how many were not planned, and how many have been executed, and how many are pending. Then when we talk about the reliability, then we are also showing over here like how many equipments have the reliability less than 1 year, how many have 1 to 3 years, and so on. Any leaks and failures and replacements that are also shown on the screen, any logging results, maintenance activities, any maintenance which have been carried out for the current year, and how many have been carried out in total. Any work orders and bad actors that can also be shown over here. Then we have a complete hierarchy over here. I'll also show you it from the form view. The form view basically has different views like engineering data, FMEC analysis, risk metrics, any plant maintenance routines, history records, or condition monitoring data. These are the various toolbars. As you can see that if you want to add a new equipment, if you want to edit it, save it, or delete it, any documents that you would require to attach with this equipment, any advanced search that you want to carry out, any bulk loading, because we're also giving the option for loading the data directly into the software. So if you want to do any bulk loading using the Excel spreadsheets, because mostly the end users, they are convenient with using the Excel spreadsheets. So if you want to directly load the data for the software to perform the calculations, then you can use this bulk loading option. Then we have this two checklists, which is the seller inspection and the below seller inspection. So this screen, basically, if you see that it's a very detailed screen where we are showing all the data which with regards to the to one of the equipment. Let's if we go further into this tree, we see that over here, which we are showing the equipment tag number, starting from the wellhead number, then its equipment type, and then we are showing its equipment tag number. Then over here again, it's analysis owner, what it was the maintenance plant, its system name, its system code, what was the discipline, wellhead head number, equipment tag number, equipment type, equipment description, object type, its description, its name, and all these details we are capturing over here, and what was the wellhead type. Then other one is over here, which is more data with regard to this, equipment. If I show over here, this is like function location details, the description of function location service, and if there was any reliability data, then some specific data fields for this particular equipment. If you want to display over here, then we can add over here. For example, what was the operating temperature, outlet size, operating pressure, design temperature. All these details and its values we are capturing on this screen. Then, as Mr. Wajahat explained, that we are doing the complete analysis of various equipments using Wellhead. And then the whole procedure we are capturing over here, starting from the location of failure modes. These are various failure modes that are associated with that particular equipment. They are shown over here. They're added. In the next screen, we are performing the FMEC analysis of all those equipments, of all those failures that we have captured in the software for that particular equipment. In the third one, we are doing the POF-COF assessment. You can just select one which has one POF-COF carried out. So basically, using this tool, we are performing the complete FMEC analysis of the various equipments which are covered under the wellhead. So one feature that I forgot to show over here was just that, when we click on this any number, any count over here, then it shows us the complete list of those equipments whose risks have been mentioned over here. For example, I clicked on medium, so it is showing me all those 44 equipments whose risk was categorized to be as medium. I can click on the select, and then I can directly go into the analysis data of that particular equipment. And this is basically the risk metrics. We have one for the safety, for the environment, and the capital. This is basically coming from our FMEC analysis. If we go back to the FMEC analysis, then I can show you that against each allocate failure mode, we are doing the complete FMECA. Then we are doing its probability and consequence assessment for level 1, 2, 3 for business, environmental, and capital. And accordingly, its risk ranking is carried out. Then the next step over here is for the PMR. And after the PMR, we are recording the history records and its condition monitoring. So all the data that we are capturing in the form view, it's also being shown in the list view. Okay, so all the data which we are capturing in the form view, it's also showed in the list view, which is engineering data, FMEC analysis, PMR, and risk and history records. Then we have various reports which are standardized, like safety risk metrics, environmental risk metrics, business risk metrics, capital risk metrics, and overall risk metrics, FMEC report, the Velosi PMRs, Velosi recommendations, code catalogs, and well details equipment summary report. So these are basically various standardized reports that can be generated using the system. We have the feature of custom query. For example, let's say I want to view certain data as per a particular criteria in the software. Then I can use this custom query feature to preview that data. Any reference documents that I want to attach, they can be previewed using the reference document section. So, Mr. Wajahat, would you like to share anything?
Samia, thank you very much. I think you have explained it very well. That was the last part of the webinar, an introduction to our software, the VAIL-Plant methodology. I think you have covered most of the slides already. But if you want, I can go over the VAIL-Plant plan to act life cycle interface as well.
Yes, I think go ahead. You can.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Right. So, Mr. Mia has presented the VAIL-Plant integrity software, how we normally use it for different applications. That includes the wellhead integrity as well. We are certified, the software itself is certified with SAP integration. We are certified for SIL, we are certified for ASME and API. Now, actually, the software is based on a plan, do, check, act cycle for managing the different type of risk, whether it is related to well integrity, whether it is to do with the reliability, whether it is to with risk assessment and inspection, etc. Each step or each stage can be interfaced with any ERP or CMS software. We do have a live database update as well, integration with our VAIL-Plant software. Complete feature and services, why we recommend it to our clients is basically because we work on a modular approach. Then we have a hierarchy system recording, which is as per ISO criteria, where the complete system level effect can be seen through the system, through the software. There is a complete dashboard overview. It gives you a complete picture of your system in place, what kind of reliability failures you're noticing, what kind of availability issues are there, if there is a production fall or gain within a certain time period, etc. Asset management portfolio is there, condition monitoring records, inspection and maintenance history is there, complete inspection planning and scheduling capability, FMEC analysis, a single defect analysis or screening for RCA cause RC or RCFA is there. And as we already mentioned, the risk assessment is basis for this complete VAIL-Plant software. Why we started this thing. We can also support root cause analysis, data verification, integrity operating windows, KPI management dashboards, standard and custom reporting, integration interface with other CMS systems, SAP, ERP, etc. Estimated corrosion rates and failure replacement or anomaly records. We can have a complete work order management system with the VAIL-Plant solution as well. Now, the essential elements of this software that we were just presenting is data reliability and integration. You can have bulk loading, you can have integration with third-party software, multiple third-party software, even live systems we can integrate with. Reporting and custom query interface is there, inspection maintenance interface is there, complete documentation interface for engineering documents especially is there. We can actually interface with document controllers like SharePoint, its OmniDocs, InVision, etc. Similarly, drawing management system we can interface with. This is basically our methodology, how we built this VAIL-Plant software. It's built on a risk assessment approach for different, what you can say, class of equipment with a complete calculation engine, analysis system, reporting, and dashboard monitoring system. It is then there's the integration layer, which allows anything or any software to integrate or liaise or coordinate with our modules for different purpose, whether it is pressurized equipment, rotating equipment, etc. This is the RBI assessment process in a very simple flowchart form, like how the software helps to perform RBI. Similar approach will be used for civil integrity management, health management, and structural integrity management as well. And there is a rotating equipment management system, which is mostly FMECA based. Similar approaches can also be used for well integrity, lifting equipment, cathodic protection system, flexible pipelines management system. Now, our advantages or competitive advantages over our competitors, you have a customizable risk matrix or risk ranking criteria, driving degradation methods are there, probability and consequence failure analysis for individual equipment is there, consequence to different consequence classes we can assess. As I was explaining, you can go 4, 5, 6, whatever is there. Valuation of impact of changes in process condition and material, like the operating windows, with time they change, so the software can adjust to new conditions as well with the right data input. Effect of inspection effectiveness, etc., effectiveness monitoring, preventive maintenance, or planned maintenance or optimization, etc., can be carried out. Inspection guideline and detailed equipment inspection plans can also be derived. Customized reports are there. So these are some of the competitive advantages our software provides over other competitors in the market. Now, if you like, because I've seen quite a few questions being raised in the Q&A window here regarding a software demo, please contact our software team if they can arrange you a demo for the software. We do provide live demonstrations for different clients, so we can assist you in that regard as well. Thank you so very much. There are few remaining questions. Most of them are related to provision of this presentation. All these presentations are available in our Velosi channel. You can get it. Can get conclusion. Can we do? Okay, yes, you can address each asset, not just each wellhead, each asset, the wellhead system it is associated to. Basically, the question is, can each single wellhead can be analyzed within this system? Yes, it can be. Even a single asset can be analyzed within this system with its complete system hierarchy. Is the risk final risk output will calculate automatically post update? Yes, it will calculate the risk level automatically depending on what kind of history is there. If operator history is there, it will calculate the MTBF as well with assigned failure modes if the correct assignment of modes is present in the history. And based on the probability and consequence level, the risk level, it will be calculated by the software. Location shall be considered for well risk assessment. Yes, it will be considered definitely, especially for the old wellheads, well completion part of the report and output. Okay, MASB is not just calculation. You have to go for the operating conditions as well. For any questions related to the certification and CPD system, please send an inquiry to our team. PSX making reporting knowledge planning and monitoring plan. Sir, it is there's a question that whether the software can integrate with the SAP and Primavera. Well, it can integrate with SAP. Primavera output is in a I believe when you mention P6, you're referring to Primavera. If it is a different software, please do mention it. But most of the softwares we can integrate to. We can integrate to the scheduling system within the Microsoft databases. For Primavera, you will have to check with our team. I think it can integrate, but not a live integration. Thank you very much. You're welcome. And civil integrity, yes, we can monitor civil integrity, but that will be a different module, sir. This particular webinar was related to well integrity only. You may want to wait for the civil integrity module. It is a different module of the same software. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance. I hope that you have got some good knowledge from this webinar and a good understanding on how this well integrity management system works. Kindly feel free to contact our team regarding any live demos, any further information you require regarding these softwares or these integrity management systems, or if you wish to go for a formal training course. He also does offer formal training courses as well. If there are any more questions, kindly let us know. Otherwise, we'll be ending this webinar shortly. Thank you very much again, everyone, for